what are the prospects right now? What does the market look like? What are your preliminary thoughts? And then we can drill down from there. Russ, I'll start with you.
So I'll start with saying the market, for the market's very robust. There's a lot of patent transactions going on. We've been monitoring the market for 18 years now at AST. We have a software platform that's kind of like the MLS listings for patents that are available for sale or license. So we've got a lot of rich data and history there. But it's a very robust market. At the same time, monetization of patents is hard. It kind of sucks. I mean, it's this crapshoot between, you can do everything right and there's still no guarantees. I mean, you have the litigation landscape is a crapshoot, but you need quality patents, but quality patents are not enough. You need EOUs. They're essential if you want to have a deal, but they don't guarantee anything either. And then you have to be reasonable, and reasonable's got a different definition to everybody. So it's a really hard market, especially if you want lots of money. But that's the. I'll stop there with the lay of the land to start with.
All right, and we're going to come back and peel that onion quite a bit. So thanks, Russ. Bill, your preliminary thoughts on the market, the industry, where we're at, whatever you want to kick off with.
Yeah, I think we are seeing more portfolios for sale. They still require a lot of due diligence. Some question about the quality of a lot of the portfolios. Often we'll see portfolios that said, oh, there are 40 SEPs in here, and we'll go through them and find maybe there's one. And I think that the point about good EOUs is a great one. Anyone who is selling portfolios of patents should prepare good claim charts so that they can show that what they're selling actually is what they say it is. And I think the industry could use a lot of improvement in that area. Of course, that requires an investment, and but in order to make a bigger sale, that investment is worthwhile. On the monetization end, I think we see a lot of creativity in terms of trying to monetize patents, but it's still an uphill battle. It's easiest, say, in Germany. Brazil can be good and growing. Some question mark about India. It seems to be better. May take a long time, though. And maybe a little bit later we'll discuss the latest in the VLSI Technology Intel case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. Thanks, Bill. Jonathan, open stage here for you to rant or pontificate or whatever you'd like to say.
That's dangerous. It seems to me that IP as an asset class is historically beat down, in that if you were to size it and you look at all of cybercrime, how much not the defenders, not the solutions, but how much, and this is my business, how much the criminals are getting, just if you were to measure it in GDP. The figure supposedly comes to 1.5 trillion. That's the economic activity of cybercrime for the criminals. Take a step down from that. If you look at
what was that number again?
$1.5 trillion.
I thought you said that. Oh my God.
Globally.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you take a step down from that, another example, and you look at meme coins, how much is spent on meme coins? $100 billion last year in that useless asset class. And then you've got the useful arts, patents, and the licensing of patents. And if the figures I looked up can be trusted, that's about $50 billion. So all of this inventorship and authorship has been driven down historically to a very low point. And I think that's because it's very hard in this asset class to get to quiet title where you can actually enforce and have predictable results. And the last director at the Patent Office, I think, made that much, much worse. And so I'm hopeful that the outlook now is that we are possibly about to enter an upswing where there can be predictability and pathways to quiet title where this asset class can actually be better monetized than it has been. But that's the outlook.
Okay.
I've been waiting for that uptick for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, the market's been, it was from 2013, about 2013, the market's been going down, and it's been a buyer's market, whether you're a licensee or a purchaser of patents for a while. But I thought it might be like a V-type picture, and I thought it would hit a bottom and start going back up. But it's definitely been more of a U, and we're still in that bottom of the U. And I've been waiting. I've been thinking for the last 3-4 years that I'd start seeing it tick up, but it hasn't yet.
Well, we may be seeing it like the very beginning, and so I want to flag this for any of you who are buyers or want to buy portfolios or patents. Pay good attention to what we're going to talk about here on this panel, because there may be some reason to think we're at the bottom and that things are going to go. So it may be the right time to consider buying. Now, the reason I say that, Russ, if you could share with the audience what you shared with us on the pre-call about your deal volume over 2025 compared to 2024.
Oh yeah, we've already done a whole year's worth of deal volume in 2025 than we did in all of 2024, basically in the first 6 months. So deal volume is incredible, but they are lower price deals.
Are they lower than 2024?
No,
or?
So it hasn't been going any lower.
Lower, okay,
That's the good.
right.
It's been the same for, I'd say almost 2020 to now. It's been just flat. It hasn't been going lower, but it hasn't been going higher yet either. And you see, there's a period in like 2022, 2023. We saw brokers and patent owners trying to push it, seeing if they could get a little bit more, and you see them testing the market to see if it's turning, but it wasn't yet. And then some of them you see all just capitulate, and they're like, okay, I realize this isn't a great market. If I want to sell or license in this market, it's going to be for lower than what I originally wanted to. But that might be a better course than litigation, because that's such a crapshoot too. But to your point, I think you're right that my hope is that by 2026, 2027, we're going to be seeing it going up.
Yeah, so with deal volume increasing on that level, but money not increasing, that would suggest to me that we may be on the front wave of this upward curve. Or, the wave is constant waves in the ocean. You can't see them until they get close to shore. I think we may be starting to see this one come closer to shore.
Well, it's interesting you say it, because I was just looking at a statistic I was looking over our past year and a half worth of quarterly market reports. And to your point, I think people are realizing there are a lot of buying opportunities right now. So NPEs were amassing 22% of all transactions in 2024. Now in 2025, it's gone up to 44%. They've doubled their participation in acquisitions of patents. So I think they're seeing this as maybe time to get patents before the market starts turning. And it also means that litigation risk is going to be increasing as well.
And I would suspect, do you have a suspicion that this maybe has to do with what many of us perceive to be likely a less active PTAB moving forward?
I think that is part of it. I know re-exams, I don't know if you've been following this, Gene, but re-exams have been increasing. As PTABs have been slowing down, re-exams have been accelerating. And I know, even talking to, if people are familiar with unified patents, that their whole business is built around PTABs, they're not filing any PTABs anymore. They're filing all re-exams now. Mm-hmm. That's how they're trying to challenge patents. So
yeah, and I've said this for a very long time, I was surprised the volume of re-exams were not higher. And I know that it comes with risk, right? Because you as the patent owner, you go into re-exam, you can come out with more claims. So there is some risk, but if you look at the numbers, they're not very dissimilar compared to the PTAB. And there's some self-selection going on there, but usually they institute around 90+%, and about 80% of the time a re-exam is successful. Yeah. So it's not all roses, but it will be different for sure. Bill, what are you seeing in the market? Are you seeing increased deals like Russ is, and are you seeing increased value yet, or what you're observing in line with what Russ is talking about?
Yeah, we are seeing a larger volume of deals, or at least of offerings from different brokers, from well-established brokers, and also some newer players in the field, say out of China or Taiwan or even Singapore, and with a variety of different quality levels. We're seeing Chinese companies offloading or trying to offload large numbers of patents. We haven't seen great quality, although there are quality assets out there.
Are they trying to offload U.S. assets or Chinese assets or both?
Both
Okay.
that we see, yeah. And the best sort of deals we find tend to be directly from operating companies, say companies that have decided to get out of a business for various reasons. It might be competition from Chinese companies or other companies, or it may be just a different direction in business, and therefore they have patents that cover an area that they don't really need covered anymore in terms of protection, and so they're willing to sell those. And those can be very worthwhile. And we're also seeing more, say, strategic licensing deals where companies are having conflicts with other companies, and it's worthwhile for them to offload a set of patents to a third party to kind of fight the fight for them or help them come to a conclusion in terms of a license or a license renewal.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your saga. You're in the cybersecurity space. You guys are a leading innovator in that space. Some large entities were found to infringe. Your patents in litigation were found to be valid or confirmed valid. And then you had some trouble with the PTAB. But where do you stand at the moment?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of perspective on why the licensing market is the way that it is, and its ceiling and its floor, and really why we end up with a lot of NPEs. And that's because of how difficult it is to practice and to use IP as a competitive barrier, which is the strategy that we have in our company, which is that we developed market-leading technology for cybersecurity, and we use the IP in order to enforce and to allow us to reinvest into competing in the marketplace. And so it allows us to do a type of IP use that's very different than what's common.
So you're an operating company. You're an innovator and an operating company.
Yes, exactly.
Smaller than Cisco, right?
Smaller than Cisco.
And that happens to be one of the people you have a verdict with.
Yes, and Palo Alto Network's another one of our major competitors that we're also in litigation with. We're about 120 people in the U.S. and internationally. Mm-hmm. Majority engineers, technical people, marketing and sales, and we're selling to Fortune 100 companies. We're selling all over the world, but we're in a hot fight on the IP issues.
Yeah, and so where does your case stand at the moment?
Well, I think we've experienced just about everything that can go sideways in the system. I'd like to believe, but maybe there's more.
Let's knock on wood.
And so one of the first major cases that we had went up, got a terrific judgment, and then was reversed on a financial interest issue. The Federal Circuit didn't like the method of divestiture that the district court used when they found out about a stock interest on the part of their wife.
So this is the famous issue with Judge Gilstrap. His wife.
No, it was Judge Morgan.
Judge Morgan. Okay, and his wife owned. It was like $10,000 or something worth of stock, right?
$4,000.
$4,000.
And his wife's stockbroker had purchased.
And they didn't own stock in your company.
Didn't own stock in our company.
They owned stock in a company that lost.
That's right.
And somehow that tainted the.
Well, he divested it too, but they didn't like the way he divested it. So that's how long this thread goes.
Yeah.
So anyways, with an outcome like that, it goes to show you a little bit about what IP is like as an asset class, which is with a fact like that, then all of a sudden it can be ground zero, start again. So, of course, we have to start again. And then separately, when you file a major case like we did with Palo Alto, everybody has to endure the IPR onslaught. That adds years to the process. That adds cost to the process. I think opposing counsel knows it's unlikely to resolve the matter, yet it's dilatory, and it's hugely cost-effective. Balances an enormous amount of expense. Then you fight all the way through that. You can get to the point of getting a judgment, and then you can win that judgment. You can get that judgment on appeal, and then it can be, deactivated for simple procedural issues, which adds more delay and more cost, and on and on. So I think that the lesson in monetization for an operating company is that you have to understand and be prepared for all of these procedural pitfalls that really are all related to making it very hard to have title to your IP.
And I think we've talked about this before, is that the more successful you are, the harder it is almost too, because you get if you won $100 million judgment, it'd probably be easy, but you win over $1 billion judgment. I was doing some research just coming down here. The Federal Circuit's only affirmed 2 judgments ever that were over $1 billion, but they were greatly reduced. One was a $2.5 billion judgment that they reduced to $1.2 billion, and another one was like $1.8 billion that they reduced to $1 billion even. And those are the only 2 ever in existence. So the bigger your verdict, the less likely you are to succeed in the long run.
Yes, and not only has the industry gotten crushed, IP as a licensing category, but it's very poorly calibrated, because in the time frame that's all been unfolding, we now have multi-trillion-dollar companies, and we have multi-billion-dollar per month product lines, and yet we're to believe that there's never been an infringement that's greater than a percentage point of that revenue. That's hard to believe.
Yeah, and what's going on with your company is just the word for it is just unfair. It's just unfair, and so as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you had the district court had this financial disclosure that the Federal Circuit didn't like, and it got erased for that reason. And then when it went to the PTAB, you lost at the PTAB, but then it was discovered that the PTAB judges actually owned more stock than the district court judge did.
That's right.
And the PTAB ruled that that was not a reason to disqualify any of the judges, and that the decision stood. And then on top of that, not only did they say that, but they said to your attorneys, and if you raise it again, we're going to sanction you.
That's exactly right. And they, of course, they own the stock in the party that they ruled in favor of. They allowed time-barred Cisco to join the proceedings and entered that ruling the day before recusing, ultimately upon our pressure, which they said they did for just convenience to simplify.
Well, it's certainly
matters.
Convenient for Cisco.
It sure was. Sure was. So that case is fully submitted, and we should all hear the result any day.
Is that at the Federal Circuit?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so more to come on all this, but you guys have just been kicked around, but you're still in business.
That's right.
So you must be doing something very right if you can weather this storm.
Well, calibrate and be conservative.
So, guys, on the business end of the legal community here, I mean, what does this story of Jonathan's with Centripetal mean to you? If you were, maybe the path we could go down is if you're going to advise companies who have portfolios and are, actually competitors, what advice do you give them to maximize the value of their IP?
Well, it's definitely multifaceted. You not only need technical expertise, legal expertise, market expertise, and having some relationships don't hurt. So you really need those 4 things to really have a successful monetization program. That's why if you're selling or licensing, having the right broker that has certain connections can help. But you can't just have good enough patents, and you got to have the technical thing. You have to have the legal aspect of it pinned down, and you have to convince the licensee or buyer that the risk reward makes sense to them, and that's probably the hardest part. So not only does it have to be clear to you, but it has to be clear to the licensee or buyer. And I think that is probably the hardest part of any monetization program, because as we all know, nobody willingly wants to take a license to a patent. They claim that they don't infringe. If they don't infringe, the patents are invalid. If the patents aren't invalid, the money that you're asking for is too much. And let's face it, the Federal Circuit has not helped anything, and the Supreme Court hasn't helped anything in this space. We've been dealing with damages law for as long as I've been alive, and there's still no clarity. In fact, it might get muddier all the time. So, you probably, I don't know what Cisco was claiming the damages should be when you were getting over $1 billion award, or how much you were actually claiming total, but the gap, the valuation gap between parties is enormous. And that is the biggest problem. And the courts have not done anything to add any clarity there whatsoever. So that's probably the biggest obstacle to monetization, because there is no clarity on what the rate should be on a license, what the selling price should be on patents. And it varies. We see patents for sale all the time, for anywhere from $20,000 to $3 million, let's say. And then they get into court, and of course, when those patents get into court, and we see about 80% of the patents that are litigated, we've seen them before for sale. They get into court and they're asking for, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. Why is there this disconnect between the damages that are being sought in a litigation and the amount of money that's being sought from just a license deal or a patent sale? It hate to say it, but it's a mess.
Yeah, it certainly is. Bill, thoughts on any of this?
Yeah. And just as you were talking, I thought, we look at patents as kind of the end product, but really they're just an item in the supply chain. The end product is the result. When we're talking about monetization, what result can you get? And there is a lot of risk, a lot of unforeseen situations, uncertainty. And so one of the ways we address that is with multiple licensing programs across different technologies, different patents, different licensing companies, rather than placing a big bet. That being said, if there was a potential, billion or multi-billion dollar bet, we would place that too.
Yeah.
But those patents are difficult to find, and the road is really tough.
Yeah. So, what impact in all of this has the availability of litigation financing had in the marketplace? I mean, because it seems to me that if it hasn't affected valuation and upwards, but at some point it would seem like it has to, because one of the games we've called this the war of attrition. I mean, that's what they're fighting, a war of attrition. And if Centripetal was not otherwise successful at what you were doing, this war you would have lost a long time ago, because you would have run out of money. And but there are many companies that their whole product is the research and development that leads into the patent and their licensing, and they don't have the wherewithal to stay the course, because they're being starved revenue.
Well, we see that on the NPE side too, is that there's a lot of consolidation now too. So when I mentioned that NPEs have gone from 22% of all acquisitions to 44% of all acquisitions in just 1 year, it's consolidated in the top. 80% of those acquisitions are just among the top 5 NPEs, and they're buying from other NPEs.
Can you say who they are, or do you not want to say who they are, or?
Oh, they're companies like Dominion Harbor and others. I mean, we could publish the list. That part's not confidential. I don't have all the names off the top of my head, but I was just looking roughly at the overall trends that we were seeing. But so yeah, it's very consolidated but we've seen a lot of NPEs buying from other NPEs. So that shows you where the smaller NPEs, to your point, probably can't afford to even litigate. Mm-hmm. Some of them have litigation funding back in, but they sell to larger NPEs that have litigation funding to help. But it all is going to come down, if you want to see the values go up, it's going to require the courts to do more. And I think that's where because the litigation funders aren't helping licensing efforts, they're not helping patent sales. all they're helping is really litigating the patents. And when if we see a more of a pro-patent judgments come out, then you'll see the valuations go up, because as companies start worrying that the risk is higher for them if they face litigation, and litigation's the threat of litigation is the biggest driving force for monetization, they see that the values will go up.
Mm-hmm. Bill, agree, disagree?
Yeah, when you have litigation funders, it kind of adds another party to the settlement negotiations. It may be that some cases might be able to settle, but for litigation funders with different financial expectations, particularly when you get into the billion or multi-billion-dollar verdicts, they see, well, we deserve that. That's what the jury said, or that's what the court said. And if they're willing to make that gamble, it may or may not pay off for them. And I think, we've seen this uptick in portfolios for sale, but I think there's also been an uptick in lower quality portfolios for sale. There's one that we were about to buy, and then when we did some due diligence, toward the end of the process, we found that about 15% of the patents in that portfolio had lapsed, and the seller wasn't paying maintenance fees. And I can't really blame that on the broker, because when they sell a portfolio, the seller agrees to take care of all that during the process, and so you have a lot of wasted energy. But you have companies putting portfolios out there that just are trash portfolios that they don't want anymore.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, are you still doing deals with, not the giant people who just don't care about patents, but like with others? Because the cybersecurity space is a pretty large space, right?
By deals, you mean licensing deals with others? We keep the technology to support our product line and to support our services.
So you don't like, you are, okay, so this is a straight, we want the market, we innovated this, and okay.
That's exactly right. And to just pile on this litigation financing issue, I think it all comes right out of the duration that policy has produced. So you have the IPR process up front. That can take a year and a half to get through. You got your fastest venues in district court now will take at least 2 years to get to a trial. That's serial. Then you've got post-trial that's going to take at least a year, and there's a lot of stories emerging how post-trial is taking longer and longer with no urgency. Then you've got the federal circuit timelines that have pushed out remarkably in the past couple of years.
Yeah, they have a real backlog at the federal circuit.
So add that up, and you're at 6-7 years, and we have been.
And that's if it goes smooth.
That's if it goes smooth, and so to say that you're going to take litigation funding out of the system, the only people enforcing a patent if you do that will be NPEs. That's what the result will be, because no natural innovator that develops technology inside of a corporation to attack a market will be left. That's just a certainty.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about big judgments, 6 years is a short period of time.
It
I mean,
really
you see
is.
these things get remanded several times. I remember.
That's what I was just going to say. I mean, because, like, if you're got a $1 billion verdict, you're going up and down to the federal circuit at least twice.
Sometimes it doesn't even have to be $1 billion. I remember, it's funny, because I started my legal career up in Boston, and Festo case, if you guys remember that one, that was a Boston case that went up into the federal circuit, up to the Supreme Court, back down. It was litigated for over 20 years.
Yeah, there was like 14 or 15 decisions in Festo.
Yeah.
It is crazy.
And it wasn't even that much money at stake in the case.
No. No, I don't understand. I mean, I understand what's going on some level, I guess, but I thought when we were in law school, we were taught that there will never be another Kodak versus Polaroid. And then we did have another one that made that look small between Apple and Samsung. And I know that, like, what the people you're chasing, you versus them is not Kodak versus Polaroid, but it exhibits a real problem where the Ciscos, the Apples, the recalcitrant infringer who does not want to enter serious settlement talks on any level, just keeps paying lawyers. And they'll pay hundreds of millions of dollars to lawyers over the span of this decade, and nothing to the innovator. And it just strikes me as odd, you know. I mean, that's a risk I don't know that I would be willing to take. I mean, because you're paying not an insignificant amount of money to your litigators over this decade, and then at the end, what happens? What happens if we do have a renaissance, and Jonathan's company does? I mean, you're sitting on what, like $3-4 billion worth of verdicts potentially. Or not maybe in verdict money, but in post-judgment, pre-judgment interest, verdict, and everything. I mean, that's a huge amount of money to have to pay.
I mean, isn't it eBay and the lack of an ability to get an injunction? I mean, we'll go to the ITC if we can, our first choice.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, eBay was the moment in time where things really shifted. Like we can bitch and moan about 101 all we want, and yeah, they got that one wrong too. But if you could change one decision, I think it has to be eBay.
Yeah.
eBay definitely changed the landscape for
Yep.
monetization more than any other single decision. And it changed the ability for companies to fight in litigation, because they're willing to take the risk on damages, but there's very few companies that are willing to take the risk on being enjoined.
Right.
So it changed the landscape more than any other single decision.
But I would think that if you had, even if you broaden it out to events, and you include AIA, you include eBay, you include the quartet of terrible eligibility decisions, the one that would do the most benefit for patent owners is eBay.
Yeah. Before eBay was decided, I was at Samsung, and we had a big fight with TI in the 90s over DRAM. And it eventually settled, and it was $1 billion settlement. It was payable over 10 years. That was about 1997 or 98. And so, because there was a threat of an injunction, and you needed to take a license to resolve it. Now there are other options other than taking a license.
Yeah, a lot of other options. I was just so I'm trying to get healthier. We talked about this. I've lost a little bit of weight. I finally got my hips issues, and I'm exercising again, and so forth. So I was just looking at, I wear an Apple Watch to track and help me with the calories and energy and that sort of thing. And I was like, what else is out there that could be better than the Apple Watch, right? And I've just been reading some reviews, and it's like pretty well known that Apple doesn't have certain health monitoring capabilities in their watch because of their fight with Massimo. And rather than offer this just pissed me off. Rather than offer their customers the best product, they're choosing not to continue to sell an inferior product to virtually everything else on the market in the same category because they don't want to pay a patent license. I mean, so I almost want to take a hammer to this watch and smash it so that I need to buy a new one, and it won't be Apple. But I mean, I just don't get. Are we really in that space where, these massive companies seem to just take us as consumers for granted, and they don't care?
Well, it's not all companies too. I mean, it's
No.
it's actually unfortunate that
No,
Apple is the poster child for
It
all
is.
of this too.
And you're right. It's not. But what it is I think in terms of the amount of infringement.
Yeah.
That's where, so if you're talking about all the number of companies and all the deals and all the potential liability, there's a big part of the industry, I think, that functions properly. It's just the amount of the largesse of these companies has gotten so big. That's why we're getting $1 and $2 billion verdicts, and because they have so many customers. And when you look at the quantity of infringing acts, like what 80 to 90% of them are in these, companies that just are what I would characterize various levels of the hell no society. Hell no, I'm not going to take a license. Hell no, I'm not going to pay you.
Well, the system is broken. I mean, it's quite simple. I mean, you've used a lot of different words, but it really comes down to the system is broken.
Right.
And I think the number one fix for it is the Federal Circuit has to straighten out damages law. Until there's some more clarity there, and I know you got a panel on right after lunch talking about Ecolab and damages, but if you could get more certainty around where the gap is between infringer and patent owner, you're just going to continue having a broken system. You're going to have it just doesn't really work efficiently, and people are going to fight more because they think that damages are going to be way down here, and you got patent owners think damages should be way up here. And if that gap became a lot smaller, I think you could see a lot more willing licensors. There's also I've talked to Judge Michelle about this. I'm a big proponent of Section 112 on patents. And if you had patents drafted more, I thought the Nautilus case out of the Supreme Court was going to do this. If patents were drafted with more clarity, they came out and it was more easily understood that it's not invalid. It's more easy to understand the claims, and there's not really any dispute, and you can understand that it's going to be that it's infringed, and the damages law is more concrete. You'd have a lot more willing licensees, and you'd have a lot more deals, and the whole market would be much more efficient. But right now, everybody's arguing that my patent covers the whole world. I mean, when I was at Avaya as the chief IP counsel, I had about 30 cases, and not a single one of the cases did I actually think that we were practicing what was disclosed in the specification of the patent.
Right.
But the claims are being read in a way that they claimed it was. So, of course, it's going to lead to disputes and arguments and not a willing licensee.
How do we solve for the innovator companies, the R&D companies, and not and not give a carrot to those people who are perceived to be, rightly or wrongly, the bad actors?
Well, that's my points are really not pro patent owner or pro alleged infringer.
No, you're pretty down the middle.
I have to be down the middle, but I just want to see a more efficient system. And we're talking about monetization here. I'd like to see it easier to make deals happen, and bringing the parties together. It all comes from. It's got to start with the courts and having patents, more higher quality patents with clarity.
Yeah.
Those two things alone would bring so much certainty to deal making.
Yeah. So the question is, based on the PTAB kill rate, 70% of what they see finally, it loses 100% of all the claims. And then 85% lose at least one claim. So are the patents that you guys are reviewing suggest that that is widespread the right number of defective patents?
We look at patents from a different perspective than PTAB. PTAB's looking at validity. We're looking at infringement first. And so if patents don't cover products and large volumes of products that are out there, we're not interested without even having to get to a validity review.
I'll take a little bit different take. I think there's inventions in all these patents that have been invalidated by the PTAB. I think it's a lot of just claim drafting, too broad of claims that lead them to getting the claims invalidated. But I think sometimes I wish that we could go back to a system where there was no claims in patents, back when it was just a specification. You compare that specification to an accused product and let a jury decide whether or not it's close enough to be infringing or not. Because I think the patent attorneys drafting as broad a claims as possible without much clarity and without much support in the specification has what led to a lot of these PTAB decisions. And I think there's real inventions there that don't deserve to be invalidated, but I think there's been a disconnect between the claim drafting and the disclosures.
This is something that I've lamented for a long time. 50, 60 years ago, and we don't have to even go back 100, but if you go back 100 plus years, patents were 2 pages. It was 1 page of drawings, it was 2 columns, and everyone knew what the invention was. And the claim was simply, what is claimed is what we have described, and that was it was like a design patent. That's how what utility patents used to be. And then, even up to 50 or 60 years ago, the typical patent was maybe 2 pages of drawings, maybe 2 or 3 pages of spec and claims, but they were very, very short. And over the last few years, they've gone from that to just gigantic documents, and it just keeps getting less and less certain. So my answer is I can't believe that 70% of every patent issued by the patent office is defective in total. I mean, it shocks the mind to think that that's the answer, right?
That means the patent office wasn't doing its job.
And if it is, then we should just shutter the patent office, right? Because it's a complete and total failure. Now, I don't think we should shutter the patent office. I think that's a gigantic and enormous mistake. But something's wrong. I mean, because the patents that you're getting, right, Jonathan, you spent real time, real energy, and you've spent real money investing in them from a litigation enforcement perspective, which I doubt you would do if you didn't think that they were good. So these are extremely vetted patents.
And I'm extremely cynical, full disclosure, on what's going on at the PTAB. And
I can't imagine why.
And the national purpose for it, because we have been there under broadest reasonable interpretation, where we've had 7 references combined to make this outlandish case, an invalidated patent. And I've had family members that then go to district court. And you imagine if they were to try to make the same invalidity spread that they made at the PTAB and to do so in district court, then infringement would just be, an admission, just walk away. And so, they switched to the Phillips standard, but in reality, you've still separated the infringement. You've separated all of the evidence around the development of the technology, all the facts about when and how it came in and why, which is a very material part in analyzing a prior art reference. And so I think it's really just a charade to say, oh, well, we're Phillips now, so we're good. I think that's why all these patents are getting killed.
Yeah, I think that after you get to a certain number of references, you're combining it's an admission that it's not obvious.
Right.
I also feel the PTAB does a lot of things out of context. If I can tell just a really quick story.
Sure.
I had a case that I tried up in Syracuse, and the judge did an early claim construction, and after he heard all the testimony at trial, he changed his claim construction on the eve of instructing the jury. He made a comment to us. He said, I don't know how any judge can do a claim construction without the context of what's at stake and what's the case is all about. In our case, it was a snap and fit coaxial cable connector, and not very difficult technology, but the term was snap, and whether or not snap had to make an audible sound or not. And he actually construed it as having to make an audible sound at first, which he changed on the eve of instructing the jury that it didn't need to make an audible sound. Once he had all the context, he said, "I'll never do an early claim construction." And this was Judge Scullin up in Syracuse. But I think that the PTAB does a lot of things without context either.
That happens all the time.
Yeah. Where do we go from here? I mean, what is to the extent that you look into a crystal ball, or you want to make a prediction sure to go wrong, right? Like all predictions. If you had to predict, if I strapped you to the chair and injected you with truth serum and forced you to make a prediction, have we hit the bottom? Are we going to be flat still? Are we going to bounce? What does the future hold for the industry? Anybody want to go first, Russ? You're looking at me.
I think it's going to go up. I think it has to start with the new director of the patent office. And if there's some strength that comes from strengthening the patent system from there, I think that will eventually lead to us taking an upward tick on patent valuations and going forward.
Bill?
Yeah, I think it will go up as well. I think that educating the decision makers is important, and education in DC means lobbying. And companies with big money have lobbied to get things their way. And that's been mainly operating companies, to the extent they're large investors who see patents as a valuable asset. Maybe they can have more influence. But somehow there has to be a balance, there has to be predictability, so that everyone, no matter which side they happen to be on at any point in time, has some predictability, and that the process can move forward more quickly. I think, you hear justice delayed is justice denied. That's not just in criminal law. It applies here very strongly. But I think things will go up. It won't be a straight line. There'll be hiccups.
Yeah. Jonathan.
I don't have any idea how fast, but I think that the U.S. is going to continue to lose competitiveness relative to other major nations, and I think that at some point we're going to get sick of that, and the impetus for growth is going to become so strong that we're going to be looking back towards the disruptors and towards the IP asset class, and it's going to gain some strength. And I think two of the things that could help to deliver strength to that asset class are exactly what they're doing in Europe, which is that you can narrow a claim without losing all of your intervening rights. So invalidity proceedings become very straightforward if you need to limit. And then injunctions, they never give up on those. And I think that solves really huge problems with swaths of damages law.
Yeah, I do think that we're going to be bouncing up. But the one thing I just, in my final thought, and I'll ask each of you for your final thought here in a minute, in rapid fire, but picking up on what Bill was talking about lobbying, if I had one message to send to everybody is there's no secret as to why those people who want to infringe patents or implement patents and not pay are winning this battle of policy, because they're actually fighting it. They're talking to people, staffers, members of Congress. They're going to events. They're explaining their position, and their position is not irrational. They see an awful lot of garbage. Mm-hmm. I think we all know that, right? We all know that they're just not just haters because they hate. They see an awful lot of garbage, and they're explaining what they see and the problems that they have, and they're present. They're everywhere. And then on the pro-patent side, that side is nowhere, by and large. And there's this belief that people will just do the right thing. Well, even if that's true, and if you believe that, you haven't spent a lot of time in D.C., but even if that is true, you have to make the case that it is the right thing, which means showing up, being present. And lobbying is a dirty word in a lot of places, but it really is. It turns out is not. It's just being present and making your case. And I think patent owners have to do that, or be willing to do that. I mean, Jonathan's everywhere. You guys are everywhere. You're out there, but the people that are like you and Centripetal there's maybe one or two others, right? That are really out there consistently, and I think we all can do that, and that would help. So, gentlemen, rapid fire, final thought. Russ.
The system is broken. It needs to be fixed, and there's a lot of things we can do, but I'd focus on patent quality and damages law. The one thing we didn't mention, I'll just say real quickly, is we're seeing AI being used a lot in monetization efforts, and I advise everybody to use caution there. It still makes a lot of mistakes in coming up with claim charts or identifying relevance to certain products. It picks up product specs, but the product specs it picks up are often AI summaries of the product specs that it's picking up into further AI. So there's a lot of faulty things in a lot of claim charts produced by AI that the attorneys and brokers are not checking on.
Okay, great. Thanks, Russ. Bill.
Yeah, I think with all the unpredictability, you have to do your due diligence. You do due diligence in areas that you can identify, and some other pitfalls may come up that you haven't identified. So whether you're an implementer or an enforcer of patents, you really have to do your due diligence with this many areas of unpredictability.
Great, thanks, Bill. Jonathan.
So I think IP is the most difficult and the most damaged asset class I can think of, but it's also the most important because of the promise that it holds and the potential that can be unlocked from it. So it's an area to invest, but to do so realistically, conservatively, and without ceasing.
Yeah, eyes wide open. Okay.